May 5th, 2026, the early hours of Children's Day, one of South Korea's national holidays. It was past midnight in the city of Gwangju, on a street with no one else around. A 17-year-old girl was walking that road alone. She'd finished studying at a study cafe and was on her way back to her house. It should have been an ordinary night, but she never made it home because a man was waiting for her in the dark. The two had never met. She had no idea who he even was. It was a tragedy. But that's not the only thing that made it the topic of national news. It wasn't just about the horror that occurred that night. It wasn't just about what was exposed. It was about what was hidden, because key evidence that should have condemned the killer started to disappear, one piece at a time. This is the case of Chang Yun-gi. Our story actually starts 2 days prior to the killing, on May 3rd. Another woman was fighting to survive in a locked room. She was a young woman in her 20s. Far from the country she'd grown up in, working a job beside a man she thought was a harmless coworker. That man had followed her home. And for 13 hours, he wouldn't let her leave. He held her captive. He raped her, and he told her he was going to kill her before killing himself. It was terrifying. She had no idea whether she'd live or die. And yet, somehow, she escaped, and she went to the police to report the assault. She knew her attacker. He was Chang Yun-gi. He was 23. She reported him, and then she started packing to run, knowing it wasn't safe to stay where she was. This is the kind of situation that you'd hope the police would deal with quickly, to track down the attacker and take him into custody, to start an investigation and get a dangerous man off the streets. That's what you'd hope, but that's not what they did. The police responded by sending Yun-gi a single text message, a warning, telling him to stay away. He read it, then he walked to a river and threw his phone into the water. He picked up a second one the police couldn't trace, and he began to look for the woman who got away. Over a period of more than 30 hours, he circled her home, their workplace, every place she might turn up. He was determined to track down the woman who'd slipped away from him, but she was already gone. She'd fled the city while he was driving in circles looking for her. And that was the problem, because his rage didn't leave with her. It stayed behind, looking for somewhere to land. Back to the early hours of May 5th. 17-year-old Lee Chae-won was walking home. She'd been studying into the night, and she'd thought about taking a taxi. But to save the fare, she chose to walk instead. She felt bad asking her parents for taxi money. She was considerate in that way. And her consideration didn't end there. Chae-won used to say, over and over, that she wanted a life spent helping others. She dreamed of becoming a paramedic. But she'd never be given that opportunity. On that road home, Yun-gi waited for her. The two had never met. She had no idea who he even was. But he had been following her for 15 minutes in his car. He'd spotted her walking alone and made a decision. He drove past her, then turned the car around and came back. He stepped onto the sidewalk and tried to subdue her, but when she fought back, he viciously attacked her with a knife. Chae-won screamed. She was crying out to be saved. On that silent street, her desperate cry rang out. And in that exact moment, one person heard it. A 17-year-old boy who was across the 6-lane road. He didn't know Chae-won either, but he didn't hesitate. He heard her cry for help and sprinted straight across all 6 lanes to reach her. He knew it was dangerous, but he did it anyway just to help a stranger in need. Yun-gi turned his knife on the boy, stabbing and gravely wounding him. And then Yun-gi fled the scene, leaving the two of them bleeding and afraid. Police and paramedics were slow to arrive. They were able to save the boy, but Chae-won wouldn't make it. There was something Chae-won said in the final moments to the boy beside her as she was bleeding. Call 119, not 112. Please save me. In Korea, 119 is the number for an ambulance, and 112 is for the police. She wanted to live. Chae-won's family later described her final moments this way. Their daughter left this world without ever closing her eyes. No matter how hard they tried to close them for her eyes wouldn't shut. The grief her parents felt is almost impossible to imagine. Their teenage daughter, who just a short time earlier had been walking home after studying, was now gone, and she would never come back. And they didn't know that there was more pain to come. Within 11 hours, the police had tracked Yoon-gi down. He insisted the attack was impulsive. He said his life had become meaningless and he'd wanted to kill himself. He claimed he'd even considered 4 or 5 different ways to do it, and that he'd happened to run into the victim on the street and acted on impulse. His story was that none of it was planned. But it didn't make any sense. In the time he spent on the run after the attack, Yoon-gi never once tried to kill himself. A man who supposedly wanted to die instead worked methodically to avoid getting caught. The first thing Yoon-gi did after the attack was get rid of the weapon. Around half a mile from the scene, he abandoned his car and hid the knife. And then he headed straight for one place, a self-service laundromat. There, he washed his blood-stained clothes, erasing the traces of what he'd done. But there was something even more shocking. While he waited for the wash to finish, Yoon-gi calmly killed time charging his vape. You wouldn't believe these were the actions of a man who just violently attacked 2 teenagers. Anyone who saw him in that moment would likely have thought nothing of it. He seemed completely normal, like it was any other day. One expert who watched footage of this gave a chilling assessment. When you've hurt someone, the normal response is panic, some kind of visible reaction. But Yoon-gi acted like it was business as usual. That alone, they said, pointed to antisocial tendencies and the possibility that he was a psychopath. Police did decide to run a psychopathy assessment on him. He reportedly came in below the threshold, but he displayed a disturbing level of overkill against a stranger. His actions, said another expert, suggested he was actually worse than a psychopath. Not someone who was born without empathy, but someone who was a sadistic predator. And this wasn't the first sign. The year before, while working a public service post, Yoon-gi had secretly filmed middle school students multiple times. Whatever happened that night, it hadn't come from nowhere. Yoon-gi wasn't panicked, and he did nothing to suggest he wanted to harm himself. His actions spoke to a level of self-preservation. He ditched his own cell phone to dodge location tracking. Then he switched taxis multiple times to shake off the police. He slipped into an empty studio apartment and hid out there. He used every method available to avoid getting caught. There was no way to see any of this as the behavior of a man who'd wanted to die. In the end, Yoon-gi was caught right in front of his own home, but his story didn't end there. On the day they caught Yoon-gi, the police searched his car and his apartment, and in those 2 places, they found 2 things. The first was a set of cable ties in his car, the ordinary kind you'd use to bundle wires, but also the kind you can use to bind a person. Then they found several sex dolls, life-sized, and the state of these dolls was far from ordinary. Some of them were severely damaged. The chest and neck areas, in particular, had been damaged by what appeared to be a bladed tool. It pointed to a sexual motive, but there were people within the police force who didn't want that information to come out. And so, bit by bit, crucial evidence started disappearing. The police decided not to seize the sex dolls or the cable ties, and there was one person who made that call. The man who led the initial investigation, the violent crime team leader at Gwangju Police Station, a senior inspector named Park. Let me walk you through what he did, one step at a time. First, he found the cable ties and the sex dolls, key evidence of a sexual motive, and failed to secure them. A report filed by the forensics unit disappeared too. It was a summary of an interview with Yoon-gi, and it carried the opinion that the possibility of a sexual motive needed to be examined. That report was dropped from the case file. One team leader analyzed CCTV footage of the attack and filed a report. It said that when Yoon-gi attempted to subdue the victim, the rear door of his car appeared to be open. It was a crucial finding, one that could mean he'd prepared for an abduction before he killed Chae-won. Inspector Park had that report deleted and had it rewritten to say the footage was inconclusive. He also ordered the crime scene forensic video of the cable ties be erased. From May 8th to the 12th, the frontline officers argued again and again that a rape murder charge could be applied, but they were overruled. And Park told his team this: don't push the case in a sexual direction. But why would someone do this? What did Inspector Park have to do with any of this? Well, it turned out that Yoon-gi had connections in the police force. His father was a senior inspector, and he was determined to help his son. And so, while Inspector Park tried to shift the attention away from the apparent sexual motive of the crime, Yoon-gi's father went to his son's apartment. He cleared out everything left inside. He broke the damaged sex dolls into pieces and scattered them across Gwangju. And he burned the cell phones his son had used. But here's the thing. The father didn't know the address of his son's apartment. He didn't know the door code either. He had help. The investigation team had told him. According to the findings, there was an instruction to hand the apartment code and the car keys over to the father. The father was also given the son's car the day after the crime. And for some reason, he drove that car around for about 2 weeks, with Chae-won's blood still on the exterior. The cable ties found inside the car, the father took home with him. Those, though, he didn't destroy. When asked why, the father said, "I didn't even realize it was important." Yoon-gi's father, an officer of the law, had gone to great lengths to destroy evidence of his son's crime. So, what kind of punishment did this father receive? Astonishingly, he wasn't even booked, because Korean criminal law has a special provision that doesn't punish a relative for destroying evidence of a crime. And here's another thing that we must not forget. The reason the father was able to destroy the evidence at all, the sex doll, the cable ties, if police had seized them in the first place, they'd have been completely out of the father's reach. But they weren't seized. Those objects stayed right there where they were. And the result of that was clear. Yoon-gi was sent to prosecutors, not on a charge of murder in the course of rape, but on a charge of ordinary murder. Now, it may seem difficult to understand the relevance of the difference between these two charges if you're not from Korea. Why would the sexual motive make any real difference if someone had been murdered? The difference lies in the sentencing. Murder carries an upper limit of life imprisonment or the death penalty, but it has a lower limit of 5 years behind bars. Murder with intent in the course of rape offers only 2 sentencing options: life imprisonment or the death penalty. By covering up the sexual motive, the police were giving Yoon-gi a chance at a heavily reduced sentence. All of this surfaced during the follow-up investigation by prosecutors and the National Police Agency's Special Investigation Unit. And the fallout grew beyond anyone's control. The public was absolutely horrified. Not only had the life of a high school girl been cruelly snatched away, but the police were actively working to protect the murderer. The acting commissioner general of the National Police Agency cut an overseas trip short and flew home early. He apologized for the distress caused to the public. The police agency formed a fact-finding special investigation unit. The police were now investigating the police. And in the end, they made an emergency arrest, detaining the team leader, Inspector Park. 3 charges were applied: concealment of evidence, abuse of authority, and dereliction of duty. The special unit stated that because of his instructions and his interference in the investigation, the outcome was that ordinary murder, not rape murder, was the charge that ended up being applied. And so Park was sent to prosecutors in custody. He denied the charges. He judged, he said, that the cable ties and the sex dolls weren't key evidence. He also said he'd never ordered any video evidence deleted. But there was one statement that left the public stunned, that there had been an instruction from above to keep the stalking and the murder from being connected. The investigation began to move up the ranks. The special unit booked his direct superiors, the Kwangsan Station chief and the detective division chief at the time, on charges of abuse of authority. For the detective division chief, an arrest warrant was requested. This case was no longer the wrongdoing of a father and a detective. It had become an institutional problem. Whether money changed hands in the botched investigation, whether there were orders from above or external pressure, we still don't know. The investigation is still going on. Chae-won's parents said that while weeping, they released their daughter's face and name to the world. They could have chosen to keep her identity a secret, but they chose not to. And beyond that, there was the pain of knowing that the whole time the evidence was being deliberately tampered with. The police they trusted had been on the killer's side, they said. Deleted reports, evidence that was never seized, the truth that had nearly vanished. It was prosecutors who managed to pull it back out. Prosecutors opened a follow-up investigation, and one by one, they began recovering the pieces police had omitted or tried to dispose of. The police weren't blind to Yoon-gi's crimes. They'd figured out the crucial part, that this was no random impulse. It was planned, and they charged Yoon-gi for what he'd done to her coworker, stalking her, sexually assaulting her, even planning to kill her. But when it came to Chae-won, they left out the one thing that mattered most. They charged her killing as an ordinary murder and said nothing about the sexual motive behind it. Murder, remember, is the charge with a way out, a number of years, and then freedom. It was prosecutors who filled in the blank the police had left. On June 2nd, prosecutors indicted him, and they did it for murder committed in the course of rape. The charge with no way out, death or a life behind bars, nothing less. But how did prosecutors prove the sexual motive the police had left off the table? With the very objects that had almost disappeared. First, the cable ties, the ones that had stayed in the car unseized and then moved to the father's house. On July 7th, prosecutors searched the father's home and recovered the physical evidence. Next were the sex dolls. The physical objects had already been destroyed, but there was material the police had left behind. Prosecutors announced they would submit the forensic report on the sex dolls as evidence. And there was one more. A cargo truck that had been parked near the scene. That truck's dash cam had been recording in those early morning hours. At the first hearing, Yoon-gi admitted most of the charges. But on whether there'd been a purpose of rape, he held off on stating a position. A handwritten statement by Yoon-gi was made public. He'd written that, given the chance, he'd try to earn qualifications. People were enraged. The lawyer for the victim's side put it this way: consider how deep the despair felt by the family must be, watching him plan his own future, even as he stands trial from a jail cell. Chae-won's life stopped in her second year of high school, and yet her killer was planning for his future. Finally, Yoon-gi got to see that dashcam footage with his lawyer. It reportedly captured Yoon-gi committing the crime with the rear door of his car left open. And before he attacked, he wrapped his arm around Chae-won's neck to subdue her and drag her to the car. It was an attempted abduction. After watching that footage, Yoon-gi's attitude began to change. On July 7th, he submitted his first handwritten letter of remorse, and 3 days later, on July 10th, He filed a statement with the court admitting his crime had a sexual purpose. The second hearing was held on July 13th. His court-appointed lawyers stated that Yoon-gi now fully admitted the charges, including the intent to rape that he declined to admit at the first hearing. Another video was made public in court that day. It was Yoon-gi after the crime. The footage showed him stopping at a self-service laundromat and washing the victim's blood out of his coat. Following that, he went to a hair salon to get his hair trimmed. After taking a teenager's life, he went to get a haircut. It was a level of callousness that was hard to believe. Chae-won's life was brutally and unfairly cut short in the early hours of Children's Day, 2026. She was a girl who dreamed of becoming a paramedic, who wanted to spend her life helping others. On a road, she was walking to save a few dollars on cab fare. She was taken from the world through no fault of her own. And the boy who had tried to save her was viciously attacked as well. The shock of this case didn't end there. Before this crime even took place, the police had been told that Yoon-gi had raped a woman and threatened to kill her. And what did they do? They sent him a text message. And then, after he went on to kill someone just 2 days later, figures within the police force did their absolute best to protect him. Evidence was destroyed, reports were rewritten, officers were told to suppress information that pointed to a sexual motive behind the killing. There were signs before the crime and there was evidence afterwards, and the very people who are expected to protect the public instead protected the killer. Yoon-gi was protected by his father. His father was protected by the law, and yet no one was able to protect Chae-won. It's too soon to know what will happen. The case is still being unraveled by prosecutors trying to piece together anything that wasn't destroyed during the initial police investigation. So there is certainly more to be discovered, and hopefully for Chae-won, for her family, for the boy who tried to help her, for Yoon-gi's former co-worker, and for the Korean public, that justice will finally be served. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.